The United States spent $3.3 trillion since 2020. They invaded Iraq and 40 nations cheered for America. And now they just got into Venezuela and nobody seems to be bothered.
With this Iran war, everybody who has U.S. military bases realizes, A, the U.S. has neither the ability nor the will to protect them. Ukraine is a weapon against Russia, the Gulf states is a weapon against Iran, and Taiwan is a weapon against China.
You know, in 1976, a British general named John Glubb published a study of 11 empires, from the Persians all the way to the British Empire. And he found that every single one of these empires lasted approximately 250 years, regardless of their geography, technology, or political systems. Now, what's interesting is that the United States was founded in 1776, and in 2026, it has been exactly 250 years. And as we all can see, America's grip over the world has started shaking. In the last 2 months, Iran has destroyed American bases very easily. China has ignored Trump's warning to cross the Strait of Hormuz. And Donald Trump has been acting like a kid who wants attention from the world. And this points towards a very big geopolitical shift in the 21st century. So I sat down with a man who saw a global shift before it hit the headlines. Meet Balaji Srinivasan. He's the author of The Network State and the founder of the Network School. Balaji has spent his entire career predicting the next big move in history. And today in this episode, Balaji breaks down why exactly is the American dream moving towards the east, and why the next century belongs to Asian giants like India and China. So if you want to know how this volatile geopolitical shift will change the future of our generation and present new opportunities, this episode will be a delight for you.
China is weak. China is importing all of its energy. The world is going to collapse into chaos and anarchy. This is the part which I totally disagree on.
Are you telling me that China will become the #1 economic superpower?
If you look at NVIDIA, TSMC, AMD, all the CEOs happen to be Chinese diaspora descent.
How is this going to affect the Indian economy, and what's our call to action?
I'm moderately bullish on India and extremely bullish on Indians. It should recognize it's not going to square off militarily against China. It should also recognize it doesn't have the martial culture of a Russia. India should, at all costs,
So today I'm here to discuss a very interesting thesis that you've put out that I firmly believe in. I'm just trying to understand how is that possible.
Sure.
You've constantly spoken about the fall of America in the near future. And America has committed every sin possible to betray the trust of the world.
Unfortunately.
But even then, the United States controls the technology, military, and the currency of the world to a large extent. And what I've seen is that every time they commit a sin, they somehow get away with it. In fact, the world kind of supports them to get away with it. For example, they printed $3.3 trillion since 2020. The dollar appreciated in value. They invaded Iraq for something absolutely absurd, and 40 nations cheered for America while they did so. And now they just got into Venezuela and nobody seems to be bothered. So what I've seen consistently is that America seems to betray the trust of the world, but somehow the dollar still gets powerful. They export inflation and the world cheers them on. So I want to understand 3 things. Number 1, with so much leverage that the United States has over technology, military, and currency, how is it going to fall? Number 2, if at all that happens, how are we positioned as individuals to take benefit or incur the loss because of that happening? And lastly, India as a country, how can it benefit from this massive geopolitical shift?
Sure.
That's the agenda for today's podcast.
The thing to understand is that I think on balance, from let's say at least 1945 to 1991, the US was on balance a force for good, which is to say, of the US and the USSR, if you looked at the countries that the US backed, West Germany had a better standard of living than East Germany. South Korea had a better standard of living than North Korea. Chile had a better standard of living than Cuba. And on down the list, in general, it was a win-win relationship where when you had free markets and capitalism and the Western alignment, your society was better off, and that also gave you the strength to resist, communism. And what happened was, by degrees after the end of the Cold War in 1991, when the U.S. it was at that moment that Charles Krauthammer wrote an essay called The Unipolar Moment.
Mhm.
And because 1991 was a very important year. It was the year the Soviet Union ended. It was the year that the internet actually had legal commercial traffic. So the NSF acceptable use policy was repealed.
Mhm.
It was the year that India liberalized because it had the balance of payments crisis and went towards capitalism. It was also the year that actually Gulf War I happened, or 1990 and 1991, right, that combination. And basically the huge victory in Gulf War I had the Soviet Union basically just standing back from the whole thing. And the US at the time under George H.W. Bush showed that it was it was just a completely dominant military, right? Like the desert was completely different than the jungles of Vietnam. This sort of erased a decade of kind of malaise and so on. And it was like, wow, the US military is just this global hyperpower. Everybody had underestimated it. And then, over the 90s, in general, America had a vacation from history. And at its zenith, the American empire had not just beaten and flipped Germany and Japan, it had the Russians, the Chinese, the Iranians, Indians, all sending their elite, in many cases, to American schools to be educated, right, in the 90s, to Harvard, to MIT, and so on and so forth. This was a level of dominance that's basically unparalleled in history. Not even the Roman Empire at its peak, not the British Empire at its peak. No empire had ever had that level of complete global and total dominance. So how do you have, like if you've ever done a business deal of any kind, to get 193 investors to sign a document is quite challenging, okay? That's just a business deal. Now imagine it's 193 countries, okay? That is the scale of diplomatic accomplishment of the American State Department over the 20th century. So at its zenith, the American left and the American right built the greatest empire of all time. The thing about all of this, once you kind of understand this broad sweep of history, there's a few more graphs. If you go to, there's a post I recently wrote called Zion is Wrong, China is Strong, okay?
Okay.
And essentially what it means, the post basically means this guy Peter Zion, who he writes interesting books. I think the thrust of what he's saying is wrong, but I think the areas that he brings up for discussion are interesting. For years, he's essentially been saying China's going to collapse and the U.S. can blockade the Straits of Malacca. The U.S. has a blue water navy and China doesn't. China's weak. China's importing all of its energy. China's, fertility crash. Its population is going to zero. And what's going to happen is the U.S. is going to withdraw from the sea lanes. The world is going to collapse into chaos and anarchy, but we are energy independent and we're going to be at home and we don't need to maintain the order of the sea lanes anymore because the Cold War is over, right? Now, I do agree with some of this, which is to say that the U.S. is going to retreat from the world, that the U.S. did guard the sea lanes, and that these concepts are important. Where I disagree is that this pullback of America is voluntary. I think why would America pull back if it didn't have to pull back, right? And so now this brings us to American empire, right? So I just kind of give a review of the things leading into 1991 and then the period from 1991 to September 10th, 2001. And during this period in America, it was a vacation from history. It was Seinfeld and Friends. It was music and movies and sports. And growing up in the 90s, as I did in America, the least interesting thing in the world was politics. Nobody cared about politics. It was like talking about the bus schedule, right? Like it was a weird, it would be something where, maybe there's somebody who's really interested in, I don't know, stamp collecting, butterflies, right? That kind of person would be interested in politics. Nobody else really cared. It did not matter to the average person. And it was just like literally music, movies, sports, recreation, entertainment, having fun, maybe building a business in the 90s, with the dot-coms and so on, right? And the biggest political issue was like Monica Lewinsky in 1998 or something like that, right? Do you know what that is? It's a sex scandal with the US president. Okay.
Oh, yeah.
It was simply not something where people cared that much. The main reason I say all this is American dominance of the level that Krauthammer wrote about in that essay, The Unipolar Moment, is actually extremely unusual in history and even unusual for America. It's basically something which is a 1950 to 1991, arguably to 2001 kind of thing. It's an interregnum where, like all these great civilizations, India, China, Russia, Iran, Germany, Japan, they're not meant to be this weak, right, in history, right?
Yeah.
Especially China, especially India, right? They were not this weak. If you go back and look at historical times, for most of human history, recorded history in the East, these were gigastates, right?
Yeah.
Or these were, or let's say megastates of millions and millions of people. Why could they support millions of people? Because they had huge, complex economies. That's why Marco Polo sought out China. That's why Columbus risked his life to get to India. This is why there was rough military economic parity across the Eurasian continent, why the Huns and Mongols could invade Europe, why the Arabs could take Andalusia. Why did the Christians have to do the Crusades? It was actually a military conflict. So it wasn't just a total layup to conquer everything, right? And there's a graph that, if you go to that post, Zion is wrong, China is strong, that actually shows that the world economy was based in Eurasia. China's under communism, India's socialist, Japan was nuked, Russia was nuked, not nuked, but under communism. Eastern Europe was blown to smithereens by World War II. So only the US and Western Europe had any industrial base. That's why the rest of the world was third world, right? It wasn't like they were third world for all of history and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
The Qing dynasty actually was a big thing in China for a long time, right? Like other cultures were not just total barbarians, on their hands and knees. This is the mentality that many Americans have, many Westerners have, that these third world countries were always third world countries and that the West just got ahead of everybody. That's actually not the case. They kind of destroyed themselves with war and communism. Many of these things were things that were imported from the West, by the way. Communism was not indigenous to China. Socialism was not indigenous to India, right? These were alien ideologies that were brought in that were not what the historical operating system was of those various cultures, right? And so now you have, if you take the top 5 economies, right, top 4 economies, by GDP PPP, China's number 1, USA number 2, India number 3, Russia is actually number 4 by PPP, right? Purchasing power parity. And that's the World Bank's numbers, not my numbers, okay? And so now the world economy is rocketed back out so that it's no longer majority Western anymore, right? This is actually the natural state of things. However, from peak America, this feels like a huge decline. So now this is the moment that we find ourselves at, right? Where by a number of numerical metrics, if you look at the G7 versus BRICS, if you look at the, where manufacturing is happening, right? China in particular is number 1 in steel, and it's number 1 in ships, and it's number 1 in cars, electric cars, and it's number 1 in many, concrete and nuclear plants and a million other categories, right? So, but India, by the way, is a distant but real number 2 in many of these things. India is number 2 in concrete globally, right? India is number 2 in nuclear reactors under construction. You saw the new thorium thing, right? On many graphs, China's here, but India is here. It's a distant but real number 2. India is going to flip the EU in electricity production. I know the EU has a smaller population, but still, India is increasing in electricity production, right?
But before we move on, I would like to thank Odoo for supporting our content. Everybody today is talking about AI. But if you're actually running a business, you are wondering, how can you actually make the best use of AI, isn't it? But imagine AI helping you run things, handling tasks, giving insights, and practically helping you run your business with 10x efficiency. That is what Odoo is building right now. AI is fully integrated across the entire Odoo ecosystem, designed to make your life easier by making everything work together. It starts with Odoo's AI agents. You can choose the agent model, define its response style, and set its core subject or purpose. Once that is done, your team can simply open a chat and ask for anything they need, whether that's information, action, or insights, and the agent will get it done for you. For example, your sales pipeline becomes clearer with AI-driven probabilities and insights. Communication becomes faster with instant summaries and smart replies. Even everyday tasks like note-taking and document sorting happen automatically. And on the customer side, AI handles queries in real time and smoothly hands off to your team when it is needed. This is what makes it powerful. So AI is no longer just a feature. It becomes part of how your business runs, which means less manual work, faster decision making, and more clarity. Because the companies that will win are not the ones that will use more tools, they are the ones using smarter systems. And that is exactly what Odoo delivers. The best part is, Odoo lets you start for free with just one app and scale as your business grows. So check out Odoo using the link in the description.
So what that means is that the Westerner or the American especially the American, is experiencing 2 things at the same time. When their relative power is declining, they feel more economically strained, but they also are less able to coerce other groups which have now risen. So they're feeling more powerless at home and more powerless abroad, which is causing them to flex whatever power they do have more and more and more aggressively. See, if you're at this totally dominant posture, you can afford to be generous because who cares? Give some aid, foreign aid to these third world beggars. This is like the Mother Teresa kind of attitude, right? And, in general, I know there's some people who like Mother Teresa, but I always think that kind of thing looks at Indians as pawns, not peers, right? Like sympathy object. For example, India did something a few years ago and Britain threatened to cut off foreign aid. I forget exactly what it was, but it threatened to do that. So clearly that was something where they're like, you owe us, we have control over you, right? And India laughed at that time. They're like, wow, that foreign aid is like one Series B round or something. We've grown up enough, right? And but it was still a colonial mindset where they thought of themselves as being that dominant. That wasn't the case anymore. To be clear, I have nothing against the British and so forth. I'm just saying that one exception shows that there's still a mentality that if the West flexes, it can dominate. Europe has mostly given that up now, right? They recognize they're not doing that anymore, but that's because they've had decades to adapt to it. America has not given that up yet, or it's only finding out the limits of its power abroad at this point. See, now coming back to the original thing, you mentioned the currency, the military, technology. So taking those in order, right? The American currency, the US dollar, is it is basically the way the US monetizes global empire.
Yeah.
So everybody or millions of people are in countries that hold US treasuries or that have their leaders actually educated in America, right? Just the Kennedy School of Government alone, if you look at the alumni, they're heads of state in many countries, right? Imagine if your head of state had trained at Tsinghua in China. That would actually be exceptional, right? But for them to have trained at Harvard is considered a credential, right? That's the scale and scope of the American government that it would literally train your leaders. Many countries from South Africa to Iraq, Americans wrote the Constitution, from Japan to Germany, right? So American political influence, legal influence is absolutely, absolutely global, right? The simplest is soft power. They just thought of it as good. They'd learned economics and, they'd learned, for example, that holding a US Treasury, you know what it's called? The risk-free rate of return.
Oh.
I mean, come on, right? Is it going to be the risk-free? No, it's absolutely not. In fact, if you held treasuries over the last few years, especially if you bought treasuries at low rates and then rates went up, you got completely destroyed, okay? You can see all these McDonald's everywhere, all these Starbucks everywhere. That's within the American economic zone. They're holding US treasuries. They're transacting the US dollar. And what the US does is it prints money. And every time, let's say there's $10 trillion outstanding and it prints $1 trillion, it's now diluted down everybody silently by about 10%.
Yeah.
And all of that is now money that the US government can spend.
Can you explain that with an example?
Sure. So first, let's understand why inflation is taxation. If a government wants to get money out of its people, it can pass a tax, which is visible, and then you have to wire money to them, right? You can see that people grumble, 1% tax, they'll grumble, right? Or what it could do is it could just print 1% of the money supply. In your bank account, you don't see anything change. You're going about your business every day. But it's as if the government just counterfeited a bunch of bills and they just started spending them in the economy. And later, what you find is prices have gone up by about 1%. Okay, but it's so subtle and it's so invisible that, as Milton Friedman put it, inflation is taxation without legislation. Okay, if a state can print the money and you can't see that they printed money, see, what you see in your bank is how many rupees you have, not the percentage of rupees you have as the total balance.
Yeah.
Now you say dollar inflation is global taxation because the US government, when it prints, is diluting down not just the 330 million Americans, but every treasury holder globally and every holder of, let's say, US denominated assets, right? Okay. So that means that their effective tax base is billions of people, right? At a minimum, all the Europeans, Australians, Japanese, the Koreans, many Indians, and so on and so forth, I mean, the Gulf states, right? And then you also have something else, which is the petrodollar, right? Which is that the US military, for many years, once it went off the gold standard, it used to be that you could redeem gold 1 for 1 for $1. What instead happened was oil, people sometimes call it liquid gold, right? Because of how important it is to everything. It's upstream of everything. Energy is upstream of everything. For 50 years, the US military had a deal with Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states that the US military would defend them against any attack and guard the sea lanes. And in return, oil had to be bought in dollars. And since you constantly need oil to do everything you're doing, not just to drive a car, but to drive a truck, to bring the food to your store, to operate, many kinds of machinery, right? For lubricants, for like oil is upstream so much that this meant that every day you had to go and get more dollars. It was like another tax on the whole world, right? You had to buy dollars, not simply, you weren't simply inflated. That was one tax, but you also had to spend on oil and you'd buy dollars that way. You'd give constant demand for oil, right? Okay. So this is a very powerful system because it seems architected on critical things.
This is centralization, no, sir. I had some data and it says the complete opposite because on the outside it looks like decentralization, but in the back end, US practically owns everything. For example, in the SWIFT network, $10 trillion of transactions happen every day.
Yeah.
80% of oil is traded using US dollars. And even if you look at semiconductors, 3 companies actually dominate EDA and all 3 companies are American. NVIDIA has 90% market share. And while ASML was trying to give its services to China, US banned them from doing business with China because they had access to the Cymer light source, which was essential to build the ASML machine.
Yeah, but if you look at all these things on a trajectory, you will see US dominance in decline. Okay. So let's take that ASML example. ASML already has relaxed some of these things. You can find that from either earlier this year or last year, number one. Number two is China itself is actually quickly going up the stack, right? They have, I think, 2 7-nanometer fabs. And
the red stack.
Yes, that's right. But like even with EDA, NVIDIA itself is saying, look, half the world for AI engineers, like Jensen Huang has been pushing because he knows that if China's forced to make its own, they will make their own, right? Why? Because if you look who's in hardware, right? If you look at NVIDIA, TSMC, look at Intel, and you look at AMD, all the CEOs happen to be Chinese diaspora descent, right? And it's only a fraction of the Chinese talent that's there, right? You look at AI, a lot of the talent is, right? So if you challenge China to get good at quantum mechanics and semiconductors, yes, they can do it, right? Like that's not that hard. I mean, or rather, it's hard, but it's not that hard for them.
It's like forcing the Russians to make the nuclear bomb.
Right. As I'm going to say, almost like that. That's right. It's like making Italians in a pizza making contest. You're challenging the Chinese to a test of national greatness on quantum mechanics and semiconductors in order to also make a lot of money. That's like right down their wheelhouse, right? If instead it was like arguing in English, right? That's not in their wheelhouse. That's actually harder, right? Like Chinese are great at many things. That's not their core competency, right? Indians are good at arguing in English. That's a different thing. Okay, fine. But so that's like one example, the ASML. I don't think that's going to hold up for very long. The entire American mentality also was about like playing keep away, right? Oh, hey, we've got something. We're going to keep it away from you, as opposed to let's keep ascending and keep building more, right? The entire thought was, you'll never be able to catch this, right?
So this is like operating out of insecurity.
Yes, exactly. That's right. It's essentially saying, we will try to hold this stuff back from you and try and freeze you in place, which is a total underestimation of the other guy's capacity, right? So let's take some of your other examples, Swift. Well, obviously Swift has 2 huge competitors, which are A, cryptocurrency, and B, the Chinese yuan, right? Really, one macro framework is after America, it's China and the internet. Those are the major 2 forces, right? China is everything physical, the internet's everything digital. This is an oversimplification, but not by much, right? And you could think of China and the internet as China inherits the military and the manufacturing, and the internet inherits the media and the money, right? If you look at, for example, the military, right? What's the US military being disrupted by? The internet, which is drones, cyber, all this stuff like satellite photos and so on, X, social media. The US military has lost control of the narrative. Right? It's no longer just saying they're the bad guys, we're the good guys, we're blowing them up. Everything they're saying is getting falsified in real time on the internet. And China is providing, whether it's drones, whether it's hardware, all this kind of stuff, support to the Russians, the Iranians, and so on and so forth, right? So everything, the US currency is being disrupted by the internet in China. The US military is being disrupted by the internet in China.
So I actually found a framework to put everything that you said in place. In 1976, a British general named John Glubb published a book.
Glubb, right?
Yeah. Where he actually studied 11 empires. And there's this strange coincidence where he mentions that every single one of these empires lasted more or less 250
years. Yeah. And this is right on the dot. Yes.
It was founded in 1776.
Yeah, I know.
And in 2026, it's been 250 years. And he says that these empires go through 6 stages. Pioneers, conquest, commerce, affluence, intellect, and finally decadence. And he also mentions that during the decadence phase, politics takes a back step, and sports stars and movie stars actually have a large influence over the population, which is currently happening in the US again,
Yep,
right?
yep.
So, is this happening? Like,
I
is
wouldn't
this
say
framework-
politics has taken a back foot, but
Okay.
certainly politics is in the foreground. Everybody's politically obsessed. But it's absolutely true that sports, I mean, Trump is a reality TV show,
But
right?
what have sports stars and actors got to do with the fall of an empire?
Because they are famous for entertainment rather than accomplishment,
Okay,
right? So, like,
but isn't that considered to be an accomplishment today?
it is, but it is, there's different kinds of accomplishment. And simply being famous doesn't mean that you're good at managing scarce resources. Like, what does it mean to be a politician or a head of state or a head of a company, head of a network? You're allocating scarce resources, a very numerical thing, right? I have this many bushels of grain and this many barrels of oil. And, like, how do I sell this and buy that? And who do I hire? Who do I fire? What do we build? And so on and so forth. The allocation of scarce resources is very different than simply being good looking, right? Just very different skills, right?
Yeah.
And so if you're selecting the latter on the basis of the former, to be clear, I will say this, charisma does help, right? In allocating resources because it's easier to get people to do things. Part of it is a sales job, right? So the reason that it happens at all, that some person who's put in charge of a large number of resources can manage them, why are they even put in charge in the first place, is that they're good at one part of it, which is the charisma part, right? But not good at the other part, which is the calculation part. Elon is actually rare in that he's pretty good at both. There's some who are really good at both, but it's hard. It's rare. I'd say among tech CEOs, they have to have both, the charisma and the calculation, because they have to be able to do the pitch, but they also have to get the code right.
Yeah, got it. So, and you mentioned that Bitcoin and cryptocurrency, and I've spoken to a lot of people about this thesis, and I have some counter arguments. And if you can just help me understand this better, you see, the fundamental job of a currency is to be stable, right? That's what instills trust in a currency, isn't it?
No,
if a currency keeps on fluctuating.
Well, there's at least three parts of a currency, arguably four, right?
Okay.
Which are medium of exchange, store of value, unit of account, system of control.
Okay, medium of exchange, store of value,
unit of account, and system of control.
Okay.
So medium exchange just means I can easily send it to you, right? Store of value means that it's valuable today and it's valuable tomorrow and it's valuable sometime from now. Unit of account means I can price things in it and they're stable prices. And finally, system of control is Andreas's thing, which is somebody can turn it off, turn it on, or what have you, or it's independent of that.
So I read, and correct me if I'm wrong, that in Bitcoin, there can only be 6 to 7 transactions per second. Is that correct?
So if everybody were blasting transactions on chain, yes, you could only do on that order, okay?
Bitcoin has dropped by 76% from 2021. That's like a steep jump, isn't it?
My view on what Bitcoin is going forward is it has become provable global institutional collateral.
Okay.
So that's to say there's a role for cash, gold, Bitcoin, which is digital gold, and then Zcash, which is digital cash.
But when it comes to Bitcoin, for example, Elon Musk once announced that Tesla will now collect payments through Bitcoin.
Right.
And obviously, the Bitcoin value shot up. And after that, he said, we won't be taking Bitcoins anymore. And then the value went down.
Right.
In fact, Tesla made more money by selling Bitcoin than they actually made by selling cars.
For 1 quarter or something
For
like
1
that.
quarter.
Yeah.
So when that happens, what it's essentially telling me is that when it comes to a dollar, a billionaire cannot hack the price of a dollar unless the feds decide to do it. But when it comes to a Bitcoin, a billionaire can suddenly decide to instill trust because of his endorsement, change people's behavior, instill trust, and then destroy that trust and make $1 billion himself.
I don't think that Elon did that in a negative way. I think that what happens is Bitcoin payments are hard to handle. Well, one person could do that for anything, right? Anybody can post about a stock or something like that, and they can cause it to skyrocket if they've got a large phone. Yeah, they can do that, right?
But they can't do it for $1, no sir, not so easily.
Sure, but the Fed can do it, right? Where they basically will, but actually with a dollar, it is true that it's got a different failure mode. For example, if you've got a stable society and you can hold dollars and you can transact, why would you need gold? But if you're in Venezuela and you held a local currency, that currency is destroyed. Well, you wish you had some gold. However, the dollar system is having these issues going down. And so, for example, there's entire banks that just vanish and all your dollars in them vanish, right? That happened in 2023. And the Fed had to bail out the entire system. So that's an example of the failure mode of a dollar is worse because there's risk without you thinking it has risk. Like all these people who hold treasuries, they think it's a risk-free rate of reward, but it's not, right? It's actually systemic risk. So it's worse to have something where the risk is a cliff drop at the end, as opposed to taking some downs and ups all the way through. California was considered the safest place ever to incorporate for a tech company. And now Zuck, Larry Page, Sergey Brin, Peter Thiel, Elon Musk have all left California. It's no longer a safe place because they're trying to take all your money, right? So these safe jurisdictions of Delaware and California have already shown that they're no longer safe. You just have to extend that to the United States of America. That's not going to be a safe jurisdiction.
Got it. So, and can you please help me understand how is Bitcoin associated with digital gold? Because I didn't understand that part.
Sure. It's just defined as such.
Okay, but how is it defined as such?
You want something that has gold-like properties, but that's digital. Okay. So first, gold has a close to finite supply. Right? There's only so much gold on the planet. It's hard to mine more gold. Bitcoin has a provably finite supply, and mining more gold is also hard. It requires computational resources, right? Just like gold mining requires a lot of energy and pickaxes and so on, Bitcoin mining requires a lot of resources. Number two, gold can be verified. You can put through a bunch of chemical tests and so on, physical tests. Similarly, Bitcoin can be verified. You can put through a bunch of mathematical tests and see whether it's real or not. So put those things together. It's scarce, it's mineable, but with difficulty, it's verifiable, and it's also something that disciplines states by being this scarce asset that they can't print.
So when do you think this will get normalized?
I think that like the internet and China are both so large, right? Like crypto is the internet's currency, and China and the internet are both actually flanking the dollar in a way that is happening but not visible to people, right? Like for example, Stripe is already 1.6% of internet of like global GDP. And that's an enormous figure. And they're going to be doing a ton on stable coins to move over to that, right? Is that the dollar? I would argue it's much more crypto and the internet than it is the dollar, but you can argue it's like a lifeline for the dollar. But I think unless you contextualize every American figure with the China and internet figures, or unless you put it on a time series where you can see, often, for example, people will show that the US is gaining on its allies, right? Which basically means they just think of it as, oh, it's gaining on Europe and Japan. That's just sort of draining resources from them, but it's losing ground against Russia, China, actually Iran, and actually the internet, right? Like what is America minus the internet? If you think about that, if you ask, remember we said, is internet American? Another question is, what is America minus internet? Well, there's no data centers, there's no tech companies. You knock out the Magnificent Seven, you knock out AI, you knock out Elon, you knock out social media, you knock out like actually almost everything that seems to be a hit, right? So the only spot of light, it's not like American manufacturing is doing well. It's not like the American streets are doing well, like American cities aren't in great shape. In fact, they're in terrible shape, like with the drug addiction and mentally ill people on the streets.
But Russia without internet is great because they have everything.
I'm not saying it's great, but it's like vastly improved over the 90s, right? Like people get really mad when they see photos or videos of non-Western countries and always say, are you a spy? Why are you a Russian spy? You're posting videos of Moscow or videos of China or videos of Iran. But those places have improved a lot in the last 30 years. And, I mentioned to one of my friends that one of the biggest issues is there have not been US media depictions of wealthy non-Western countries. There's like one or two exceptions. You can argue, Japan is grandfathered in, right? You have Squid Games or whatever with Korea. You have Crazy Rich Asians, but those are the exceptions, not the rule, right? And plus Korea and Singapore are somewhat Western aligned, not somewhat very, but Korea is, South Korea's military base there, right? Besides that, though, the conceptualization is that everything else is the third world, right? They're still stuck in an 80s, 90s, in the same way the same movie stars who are on screen. It's still Tom Cruise. It's still Trump, right? It's still this 80s kind of rerun type of thing. And with AI, they'll keep rerunning them forever, right? What that means is they are not calibrated. Like just to see one video of what Tehran is on TikTok is a total recalibration. It's got Have you ever seen Tehran on TikTok? Okay, go and look at Tehran on TikTok pre-2022, so you know it's not AI. You'll say, wow, this is so much more modern. People expect it to be guys. If you ask them to draw a thing on paper, they'll say it's like some guys in a cave with like they think it's Osama bin Laden, right? It's not that at all. It's a modern industrialized country. So because of that, they're totally miscalibrated. But why don't they see these media depictions? Because Americans are doing poorly or they feel they're in decline. So seeing others do well when you're doing poorly, it'll get rejected at the box office. They'll get mad about it, right?
Yeah.
So they don't want to see it. And when they see it, they get mad. So over your lifetime, you've seen India improve a lot, right? I'd love to hear your view on this. I'll give my, like in the 80s and 90s, when I went back to India, it was truly a third world country, right? It was, like cows on the streets. It was, like only one kind of car, an ambassador, and you'd be lucky if it had air conditioning. That was like an upper class kind of thing. You had like really, really extreme poverty, right? Like people would be clawing at your window sometimes, right?
Yeah.
Flies. It was just like, it was just a very, very, very poor country, right? And even the most exceptional, like elite kind of thing, it was like not very nice at all, right?
Yeah.
And forget about like internet or anything like that. Okay. So what happened gradually and then suddenly is, I came back and there was long space of time. And what I realized is Indians in India, because it happens gradually, they often took it for granted. Not completely, but somewhat for granted. Every day is better than the last in general. Sometimes it's 2 steps forward, 1 step back, but it's gradual, right? And conversely, Americans who had never been back to India, but they wouldn't even consider it back. They'd never been to India, or they'd been once. And they're like, ugh, this is horrible or whatever. They never come back, right? So only when you took a time lapse did you appreciate, you saw the highways getting built out and the airports were so modern. And now I've got 5G internet. And wow, I can get a coffee. And wow, I've got like something that's a lot like Uber. And I've got something that's a lot like delivery. And there's tech companies here. And suddenly now you can live, I would say, a Western life. I would rather, gun to my head, rather live in Bangalore than SF. Because it's just like, by the way, it's safer, right? There's less crazy people. There's no homeless crack addicts and meth addicts on the street, right? And the society broadly is on the rise, right? Even given its difficulties, India today is in some ways, India and China today in different ways are more similar to 1950s America than America is, right? America is more similar to 1950s India or China, with like on the verge of partition or civil war, But that spirit is something which, you saw over the last 28 years. I don't know. I mean, like, what is your view on that? Do you feel India has improved a lot over your lifetime?
So today, India is by far one of the best places to stay.
Yeah.
And when I'm in India, I keep complaining about traffic, but that's the only thing that I have to complain about.
It's not bad.
Yeah.
I prefer Bangalore to San Francisco, no question, right? Go ahead.
So today, everything in India is better. Like food in India, you can get Italian food in India. You can get Mexican food in India.
Yeah.
You can get everything in India.
Yes.
Okay. In fact, if you look at Indian restaurants, they have so much culture. In fact, they can very well mimic Western culture in India better than the Western cafes.
Yes.
There's so much hospitality, which makes you feel like home. And when my American friends came back to India, they were just mind blown by quick commerce.
Yes.
That you could literally get anything in 10 minutes.
In some ways, it's actually better.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they were just mind blown by it.
Right.
They were like, dude, you can get a Diet Coke in 10 minutes?
Yes.
I was like, yeah, you can get it in 10 minutes. Why is that surprising?
Right.
And they were like, dude, we have to tip the Amazon delivery boy all the time for literally doing his own job.
Right.
So that's frustrating. And if you look at Indian infrastructure, because it is in the process of being developed, it's very painful for the urban citizens. But then it's painful in a good way. It's like feeling the soreness while going to the gym.
Right.
You can feel it, which means something is being done. The pace at which we are moving is absolutely crazy, because when you look at the Bengaluru airport, it's just mind-blowing.
It's good.
It's a work of art.
It's a work of art, yes.
Right? So the kind of
people don't believe me. I put these videos up there and they're like, that's an exception. And one thing is, India is like California in reverse. You know why? In India, everything old is a shanty town, but everything new is an Apple store. In California, everything old is some beautiful, like mission style building. But everything new is a homeless encampment.
The only risk we have is that because of the gap between the rich and the poor, I'm just scared that the billion people who are right now at the bottom of the pyramid, may not prosper as much as the people at the top of the pyramid. And that's usually the case everywhere. But the second thing that I fear is that we are not investing a lot into our education and healthcare, which may then shake our foundations. And that is bad.
AI for education is going to be a big thing. I think Indians are going to be better at retraining for this new world, this internet first world, because they don't have the huge capital cost of all these American degrees, right? So the retraining will be way easier for this internet first, AI first world. Similarly, on healthcare, there's going to be a revolution in biotech that is now being unlocked by the internet, like by not just the sequenced genome, not just all the folded proteins, but by GLP-1s and things of this nature. And I think Indian health is going to radically improve over the years to come, right? My view is I'm moderately bullish on India and extremely bullish on Indians.
Can you explain?
Yeah. So China's a state, but India is a network, right?
Okay.
So China, like the Chinese diaspora does quite well, but the Chinese state does way better than that, right? Like roughly speaking, you'd say the Chinese diaspora is like a 7 and the Chinese state is like a 10, or the Chinese country is a 10, right? It's like just number one in all these different numbers.
In India, it's the opposite.
In India, it's the opposite, right? So the Indian state is doing phenomenally well. Like Prime Minister Modi is maybe not everybody agrees with me on this, but I do think on balance, he is the greatest prime minister in Indian history. Like so many metrics up and to the right. You've seen GDP, all this stuff, the thorium reactor, all kinds of things, right?
Yeah.
And you just like net, the track record is really, really impressive. Like infrastructure build out, all this kind of stuff. And so even given that, like, let's say India is a 7, like on a 10, relative to what, certainly in terms of improvement level, it's like number 1 GDP growth in the world and so forth. But the Indian diaspora is like a 10, right? It's doing so well, unmatched really right now, right? With this Iran war, what was suddenly revealed, and arguably with Ukraine, but certainly with this Iran war, every country that had a US military base, the Gulf Coast states, learned the following things all at once. First, those bases are now technologically obsolete. Recently, due to advances in electronics and targeting and AI and so on, what the Iranians have, they have missiles that can fire from 1,000 kilometers away and put through your window. Like a sniper rifle or like a sniper shot from 1,000 kilometers away. So the point being that these Iranian missiles have completely changed the defense calculus for everybody because A, they can hit from afar, B, everything above ground is not safe, C, the American interceptors are too expensive and the Iranians can exhaust them, D, all American military bases have been blown up in the Middle East. This is what the New York Times actually confirmed, right? So D, the American THAADs and various kinds of radars, the Iranians hit their eyes, right? So the Americans actually had to ship THAADs from like South Korea on an emergency basis to the Middle East because the Iranians did so much damage to such large swaths. With GPS, they knew where the things were. So anybody who has a US military base realizes that, oh man, they're a pawn for the US military. The US doesn't care about them. They may mouth some slogans, but Americans care about like the Gulf states about as much as they care about Ukraine, about as much as they care about Taiwan, which say they don't care. They care about Ukraine as a weapon against Russia, the Gulf states as a weapon against Iran, and Taiwan as a weapon against China, right? And maybe like South Korea and Japan is also as a weapon against China and North Korea, right? So, and just like they fund Pakistan, unfortunately, against India, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a very cynical view, but it's a true view, right? And so that means any country that has a US military base is suddenly realizing a bunch of things at the same time.
All of this happens. How is this going to affect the Indian economy and what's our call to action?
Okay. So my view is what Indians are good at, like our culture and history as Indians, Hindus, and or what have you. Obviously, not all Indians are Hindu and so on, but India should basically embrace the tradition of nonviolence, tolerance, diplomacy, win-win relationships. It should play to win and help win. It should not be martially aggressive. Yes, if Pakistan does something, if there's some terrorist thing, absolutely self-defense. But notice how the prime minister wrapped up the war as quickly as possible, right? Did what was necessary to kind of show deterrence and then wrapped it up as quickly as possible. Because war is bad for business, right? And then separate from that, he was able to sign trade deals from Canada to China, from Europe to Russia, right? It should also be as independent as possible domestically. So the thorium thing is really big, right?
Can you tell me more about that, sir?
So this is something that the Prime Minister tweeted the other day. This is Homi Bhabha's long-term plan. India has the world's largest thorium reserves, and it's got a breeder reactor now that actually can generate more fuel than it takes in. And I think only Russia is the other one that has this technology. And it just means that the golden age of Indian nuclear development and cheap electricity is upstream of everything else. It's just rolling out tons and tons and tons of nuclear reactors across India. And now everybody's got, forget brownouts. You've got AC for everything, right? How is that, right? You've got electric cars. Going very hard on this kind of stuff, right? Becoming energy independent, that's upstream of everything. That alone improves your standard of living because then you can fund you can power the robots, you can power the drones, power everything else, right? At an individual level, internet, and also calibrate on China, right? Understand how far ahead China is. And there's a lot that one can learn from, frankly, how China does manufacturing. India is now number 2 on smartphones, right? India's number 2 on cement. India's number 2 in nuclear reactors. India's number 2 in a lot of things. And you can learn from what China does well, recognizing that India will probably never catch China in the physical world. But if China plays the world's best home game, Indians play a very strong away game, arguably the world's best away game, just in terms of where this century, at least. I'm not saying last century. I don't know about next century, but this century, that's a complementary thing. Yeah.
That's amazing. Thank you so much, sir. I had so many insights from this. I'm just finding it hard to comprehend at this point. But this was amazing, sir. I want to say this on camera as well, that when I spoke to my friends about meeting Balaji, sir, they told me that Balaji makes some absurd predictions. But the thing about Balaji is that most of what he's saying will come true. And it most likely will. So thank you so much, sir. I'm so happy that the kind of geopolitical case studies we've posted, they're perfectly in line with whatever you've mentioned. So at least I'm happy that we've been posting good stuff.
One other thing, I will say 2 recommendations for Indians, okay, non-obvious recommendations. First is, if you're a member of the diaspora, get your OCI.
Okay.
The second thing, I mentioned Zcash, but go to zodl.com and download that app. That's like a Zcash digital wallet. And that, I think, is going to be pretty important because you want totally private cash as a complement to the total surveillance of AI. And last is come and visit ns.com, which is where you are now, Network School.
It's amazing.
Right? And basically, I think we built a startup society for not just Indians, but really the internet in general. And so just come and visit and check it out.
And tell me about the craziness of your idea in comparison to going to Mars, sir.
Oh,
you
yeah,
should
sure.
out again.
Yeah,
By the way, Balaji Srinivasan is basically building a country. And I said, sir, that's a crazy idea. And he said...
Yeah, what I said was, so Elon wants to go to Mars, and Brian Johnson wants to live forever, and Sam Altman wants to create a machine superintelligence, and I just want to start a new country. And that's the boring enterprise SaaS of crazy tech ideas. And to be clear, by the way, not start a new country in Malaysia. Here we're doing here with Network School. Network School is to Network State as Chinatown is to China. So it's like a scale model that just shows cool things and so on and so forth. There's absolutely no ambitions of sovereignty whatsoever locally in Malaysia. Okay, we're just a guest of Malaysia. We're building stuff here and so on. We're strengthening the local economy, all that stuff. At some point, when we have enough people and capital, we may negotiate with some other government somewhere else in the world, a peninsula or a special economic zone or something along those lines, and we have a treaty and an MOU, and we might be able to go and do that. And we gradually work our way up in this way. But that's a gradual long-term process.
That's amazing, sir. That's a crazy idea, but crazy people change the world.
Maybe we'll see if it happens. It's I think we're on our way. I mean, if you think about how big internet companies and internet currencies are, now they start in garages or white papers. Let's see how big we can make internet communities.
That's amazing, sir.
Thank you. Boom.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much. This was amazing.